Please welcome to the stage Christiana Figueres in conversation with Katie Couric.
Hi, Katie.
See you Friday.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Hello. We had to pause to be hugged by our previous guest.
We have a problem. We're both small women.
Oh, yeah.
So the cushions.
Small but mighty. Okay, here we go. First of all, hi everyone. Good afternoon. Happy Sunday. Thank you for spending some time inside on this probably last beautiful summer day to hear from some of these amazing people, including my guest here beside me, Christiana Figueres, who really has been so instrumental in bringing to the fore the climate change debate. And we have so much to talk to, not a lot of talk about, not tons of time, so let me get right to it. Obviously, you're here right before the UN Climate Action Summit and the gathering of the General Assembly. Before we talk about your mandate this week, let's just talk a little bit about you and a little bit about the past few days. On Friday, an estimated 4 million protesters turned out in cities all over the world. Obviously, we're very disappointed that Greta couldn't be here with us, but we also appreciate how exhausted she must be. She's 16 years old. She's gotten so much attention, obviously, especially as we were saying in recent weeks. So we hope that she's using the Sabbath as a day of rest.
I think she has a very important role to play tomorrow.
Yes, exactly.
So she better be resting today.
Yes, exactly. But, you know, obviously she and some other young people have galvanized this movement in a way that hasn't happened, I think, heretofore. So why now? Do we owe a debt of gratitude to these young people who are saying this is our future and all the other clever signs that they had that we saw on Friday?
We definitely owe them a debt of gratitude. Can you hear me? Do you hear an echo just as I hear an echo?
No, I think you're okay.
Oh, okay. I hear myself in an echo. We definitely owe them a debt of gratitude. But we owe them more than gratitude. We owe them their future. That's what we really owe them. The only thing that they're doing is they are holding a mirror up to us and saying, dudes, you haven't done your duty. That's what they're saying.
Were you surprised when you saw so many young people and start to get behind this issue in a way that you hadn't, say, even 5 years ago?
Definitely not 5 years ago. So exactly 5 years ago, September 2014, together with many fantastic people, probably many of you in the audience, there was also a mass demonstration in the streets of New York and around the world. The tone of that demonstration that we also joined was support and encouragement to governments to change what had seemed until then an impossible task, which was to come to an agreement about how we're going to deal with climate change on a global level, to change that to make it possible. And hence, a year and a little bit after, we had the Paris Agreement. But that was a movement of support and encouragement to governments. Now we have a very different tone, Katie, right? Now, 5 years later, it's okay. We know it's possible. We know that there are many benefits to be had. We know that we have the capital. We know what the policies are. We have the technology. Why the heck haven't you done your job? It's a very different tone, right?
Right.
It's a tone of what I call outrage. Outrage at the fact that there has been some action on climate, and I don't want to say that there hasn't. It's just that there hasn't been enough. It hasn't come to scale and speed that we need. So it's a very different tone. And I think it is the tone that we need in this moment, because the fact is science has told us we're running out of time.
And we'll talk about that in a moment. But first, I wanted to ask about your individual experience, because you have been focused on this issue for 35 years. And I'm always curious.
2 times as long as Greta has been alive.
Yeah, at least. And so what was the epiphany that you had, Christiana, where you said, I have got to get involved in this issue because I'm always fascinated where the genesis of your passion, or anyone's passion, really comes from. You know, I'm just going to move your mic down a little bit because I think it's on the wrong side. And actually, I know my way around a mic. There you go. Okay.
Thank you.
I think that's going to be better.
Much better.
Yeah.
The tape is in the wrong
It's
place.
okay.
Never
Yeah.
mind. Is that better now?
I think so.
Okay,
It probably should be on the other side, but that's okay. You guys can hear, right? Okay.
Where does my passion comes from?
What was that moment when you
Yeah.
said, I have to focus on this issue and I'm not going to let go?
This came from my understanding of the role of a mother. That's where this came from. Because, and I'm going to try to do this without crying, which is difficult for me. When I was very young, I come from a wonderful tiny little country called Costa Rica, and we have 5% of the world's biodiversity in this tiny little area. And when I was very small, I witnessed an absolutely spectacular species that was called the golden toad. And I just thought it was the most miraculous thing I had ever seen. It really was. It was a tiny little literally little golden toad. And then when I had 2 children, and I wanted to take my daughters to see this same miraculous being that had so inspired me, my love for nature, it was gone. It had literally disappeared. Not 1 or 2, no, the species had disappeared. And as a young mother, I was absolutely, I was just speechless. I was so shocked because I thought, okay, whoa. So in my very short life, I have witnessed personally the disappearance of that species in this tiny little country. That means that there are many other species that are disappearing. What the heck is going on here? And I thought the planet that I received from my parents was a planet that is now being severely diminished. That is the planet that I'm giving to my daughters. A diminished planet compared to what I received from my parents. That's not the TOR of a mother. The terms of reference of a mother or a father is to always create a better future for our children, not a worse future. And I said, right, well, you know, rewrite my motherhood. I'm going to figure out what happened to those little toads, and sooner or later I figured out it has to do with climate change, and here I am. Because my daughters represent certainly my direct descendants, but they represent the entire next generation and 7 generations after that.
The future.
And it is our responsibility as parents to always think that we have a collective responsibility to every young person, no matter where that person is in the world. So here I am.
Well, it's interesting because I think you learned a lot of lessons from your father, who I know led the revolution in Costa Rica, was president of
3 times.
The country 3 times. From observing him, from watching him in action, what did you learn about leading a different kind of revolution? Were there any lessons he passed down to you, or was it
yes,
totally
many.
different ball of wax?
No. I mean, it maybe is a different context, but my father's been gone for more than 20 years, and I still learn from him. And he's definitely the inspiration in my life. So first of all, I feel very comfortable with revolutions because that's how I grew up. And so for me, you know, revolution is like, okay, and next thing, what else, right? So no big deal about revolutions because sometimes we just get to that point where you have to put a line in the sand. And we are at that point on climate change. So, you know, I feel very, very comfortable with that. I also learned 2 other traits from him, or I'm still trying to learn them, that I think have been incredibly helpful. One is his absolute devotion to the most vulnerable. In his case, it was to the most vulnerable in our country. In my case, because I chose to work at the global level, it is to the most vulnerable around the world. And there are vulnerable people, including all our children, in every single country of the world. And to understand that that is our responsibility, right?
And I know you focused a lot on women in particular.
Yes.
Because you say they are the most vulnerable when it comes to the climate crisis.
Disproportionately.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Why are women more disproportionate? Yeah, women are disproportionately vulnerable and affected because certainly in developing countries, women are responsible for food, water, cooking, health, everything to do with home. And climate change is clearly affecting food security, hence, and water availability. And so you can very quickly understand that women are increasingly having to walk much farther to go get water, having to work much larger plots of land if they can find them to gather the food that they need. And then they usually come home if they're not raped on the way.
And putting themselves in more
putting
danger
themselves
the longer
into
they have to travel.
Exactly. And then they do not get much appreciation from the males in the family if they come home with not enough food. So that is one way in which climate change is disproportionately affecting women. But in natural disasters, those are slow-moving disasters. In acute, quick disasters that we have, floods, for example, women are disproportionately affected, interestingly enough, because many women in developing countries still wear their traditional dress. And the traditional dress is one that has a lot of cloth wrapped around it. Just think of many traditional dresses. That makes it very difficult to run with 3 children. In particular, in some countries in which women are not allowed even to leave the house without a man next to them. So there they are, responsible for their children, not being able to run in cases of flood, and having to wait for a man to accompany them in some traditions. I mean, they are invariably the ones that suffer the most. I remember the most telling moment that I had while I was at the Secretariat of Climate Change, where we were doing a workshop on adaptation, and we had women from many different countries, and one African woman said to me, the reason why we need adaptation is because women cannot continue to climb a tree to give birth. Because she had witnessed women during floods climbing a tree to give birth because it was the only dry piece. I mean, that stayed so deeply with me, because that's the fate of women, right? That's the fate of women. I can assure you that whoever made her pregnant was, kilometers away, had run away, and there she was. So let no one say that women are not disproportionately affected.
You played such a pivotal role, Christiana, in orchestrating the landmark Paris Climate Agreement. Gosh, we don't have a ton of time, so hopefully you can distill a probably pretty complicated answer to what's working and what's not. Go.
In 3 words. What's working? The direction. What is not working? Scale and speed. What's working is
got a lot of
yeah. I mean, next question.
You can elaborate for a few minutes. Go ahead.
So the direction is working, right? Because you see many different sectors: the energy sector moving to renewables, the transportation sector moving to electrified transportation, batteries, finance even moving. So you see many sectors that are moving in the direction of decarbonization. That direction is unstoppable. We are not going to turn that around, no matter who's in the White House.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay. Or the dark house, as I call it, since a White House without any light is a dark house. But, so the direction is moving, sorry about that. The direction in which the economy is moving, the global economy, is absolutely the correct one, because we are beginning to decarbonize. And that we're not gonna, that's irreversible. We are not at the scale and speed that we have to be at, because science has been very clear. We need to bend the curve of emissions by next year. By next year. And what that means is, we're continuing the curve of emissions. We have to get to the point and begin to come down so that over the decade of the 20s, we can be at 1/2 the global emissions that we have right now. We are not nearly on track with that.
And we'll talk about what needs to be done to get us to fuel that with sustainable fuel, not oil or gas, but to move the whole thing forward. But before we do, what about I read up a little bit on the Paris Climate Agreement. I'm sure I have so much to learn.
Did you memorize it?
No. But one of the things that I did note was that part of it was that developing countries needed to get finances so they could get help from developed nations in moving more quickly, because they didn't have the funds to do that.
There are two reasons for that.
And I know you want to speed that up and even
Yeah.
do something pretty dramatic, right?
Well, everything needs to be dramatic now.
Right.
Remember revolution?
Right.
Yeah. But there are two reasons for supporting developing countries. One is they have no historical responsibility. They will have increasing responsibility for climate change as their development continues. But historically, they have no responsibility. It is definitely all on the shoulders of industrialized countries. And B, they are much more affected. They're always much more affected because of the geography in which they are, which is actually the geography around the equator in particular, that is getting most of the adverse effects of climate change, and because their infrastructure is not as solid as the infrastructure in developed countries, and hence they're much more vulnerable, and they don't have the resources to reconstruct.
Is that starting to change with more money being funneled into some of those developing economies?
Well, yes, a little bit.
But not enough.
But more is written with a little m, and it should be with a very large m. And here's the interesting thing. We have to understand that although climate is a moral responsibility, as we have spoken, to generations and to vulnerable people, and although it is a global need, it is also a huge opportunity, and that's the piece, Katie, that we do not understand. Addressing climate change, there is no economic opportunity, there is no engine of growth, there is no source of new jobs, there is no demand for new technology that is as dramatic and as fantastic as addressing climate change. It's like we have this huge opportunity staring us in the face and we go, I'm not gonna look that way. Well, hello?
Why do you think that people have such a hard time grasping the potential?
The potential. I think it's because, let me, take my responsibility. I think it's because many of us, if not all of us who've been doing this for years, have been so panicked about the negative part of it that we ourselves have not turned our attention to, oh my God, this is a huge opportunity. And it is time to do that, because we're not gonna move the needle by my sense. We're not gonna move the needle only with the moral responsibility argument or only with the global need. We're going to move the needle when countries, cities, corporations, financial institutions, insurance companies realize this is the best thing for them. This is what they need to do for a 21st century that is going to be safe, stable, prosperous, and high well-being.
Do you see that happening? Do you see that with Jeff Bezos' announcement, for example, Mike Bloomberg's efforts? You do see it coming out of the government and at a more sort of corporate or organizational level. Is that enough, though? I mean,
no, it's not enough. I mean, the fact is there's no human being alive right now that is not exempt of the responsibility to contribute to this. So whether you're a CEO or a president or the mayor or a governor or the head of a family, we all have to contribute in whatever way. Governments have a very particular responsibility that central governments or national governments, city governments have a different kind of responsibility. Everybody has a different responsibility, but all of us share in the responsibility and the opportunity to co-create a much better world.
Let's talk about I want to go macro and then micro. When President Trump announced that
Who's that?
that the United States was going to pull out of the climate agreement once it was eligible to do so in 2020, what was your reaction and what did you say, if you can repeat it on this stage?
Oh, I remember that so well. So I was traveling and I knew that this was coming. Everybody knew 24 hours ahead. And I thought, right, I am going to sit in front of the TV with a piece of paper.
Is that the news?
What is that? This is my piece of paper that I had in front of the TV.
Okay.
With a pen that was actually a black pen. And I said, right, every time he says a sentence that is true, I shall write it down. And I listened intently to the entire speech in the Rose Garden. Poor roses. And at the end of the speech, I had a completely blank paper. And there was not one sentence in that speech that was factually correct. Not one. It's difficult to explain the consternation. It's just, honestly, I'm in deep mourning for this country. I really am. In deep mourning because, the damage that he has done is somewhat on climate change, but he has damaged the core solidarity network and our social web of this country, the love, the solidarity, he has so damaged that. And that's not who this country is. That is not. I'm not a US citizen, but I lived for 20 years here, and I know that that is not the heart of this country. And he has damaged that so deeply that I am, part of my meditation is for the healing of that once the dark house returns to being the White House.
The lighthouse.
Okay.
That too.
So let's talk about, given the fact that we're not gonna, the current administration is not on board, to say the least. Where do you go from here, depending on what happens in 2020? But let's shelve that for now, shall we? Let's talk about the week ahead and what you can do vis-a-vis the UN and this global climate summit. Are there steps that you believe that can be taken, perhaps without the United States officially going along?
Well, let's separate the United States from the White House. Because the fact is that 70% of the economy of the United States continues to decarbonize, independently of whatever Washington, D.C. is saying, because they understand that it's good for their economy. So you have all of the large states, you have most of the companies, you certainly have many of the universities and colleges, many of the financial institutions that continue to decarbonize because they know that this is good for them, and they also understand that they're playing a very critical strategic role. And the strategic role that they're playing is they are moving the economy of the United States as much as they can, not as much as if national policy were aligned with them, but they're moving it as much as possible so that the United States can then dovetail into the global efforts. Because the fact is the United States has been left behind. It has sadly been made irrelevant with respect to multilateral policy, self-made irrelevant, and the rest of the world is moving forward. And frankly, China is delighted, right? China says, oh, you're leaving that space for me, thank you very much. Highest investors in renewable energy, highest investors in solar, highest investors in wind energy, highest investors in electric vehicles, highest investors in battery development and charging, and in network. They are delighted because these are the products that are going to be on increasing demand, and they are getting themselves ready to provide those products.
So is there something that can be done to bring those companies, those universities, those state and local governments along without some kind of national policy?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. No, and you will see, throughout this week that there will be so many exciting, not just announcements of pledges into the future, but actually report outs of what already has been achieved in this country and in other countries. The fact is that he cannot stop this. This is something that is way beyond, certainly way beyond him, but it's also, I'm sorry to say, way beyond the United States. This is a global movement. And if you don't believe it, look at the kids, because they're doing their global movement, right? And so this is global. And this is not going to be stopped by anyone who wants to go back to the 19th century.
You have said, and you said early in our conversation, it's up to everyone to do their part.
Those are your notes.
Oh, I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm okay, thanks. And, I think that one of the things we talked about before we came on stage was what you would recommend individuals do. Because I think, this is an era when we're seeing grassroots movements bubble up, which for me is so exciting, whether it's about gun violence, when the government does nothing with so many mass shootings, or environmental issues. So many social issues, I think, are being addressed by citizens, getting together and changing changing the way they operate in the world and getting other like-minded people to do the same. So I want to end by asking you, what would you recommend and what would you plead that each individual in this room do to address this issue?
1, be careful about what you eat. If you're still eating red meat 7 days a week, start with giving up 1 day, or at least giving up breakfast and lunch and only eat red meat at dinner, something. But it's not good for your health, believe me, and it certainly is disastrous for the health of the planet. So be careful about what you eat. 2, how do you transport yourself? And in this country, this is really, really critical, right? Because in this country, just has not invested into the public transportation that Europe has, for example. But as much as possible to use public transportation, to walk, to bike, not to use one single gas-guzzling car for each human being. Transportation, very important, including cutting down on our flying. Thirdly, energy efficiency. This country is, obsessed with air conditioning, obsessed with heating.
I think Greta said that when she was here, or got to New York. She said it's so much air conditioning, so much AC.
Yeah, you can air condition your house. You don't need to air condition the entire neighborhood in the entire city. So energy efficiency in your home, make sure that your home is insulated. 4th, savings. Not young people, but those who are in my generation have hopefully been wise, and we have some savings. Find out where your savings are. If your savings are in high carbon assets, A, you're going to lose them, and B, you're doing a damage to the planet. And finally, be political, act political, get out on the streets, and vote for the people who have a head on their shoulders. What else? Are you going to add to my list?
Well,
I love you too.
This has been incredible. Oh, are we allowed to take questions? I don't know if we are, but.
I would love to add to your list.
Oh, okay.
Screaming. We need to support zero carbon clean hydrogen for energy.
Yes. All clean energy, absolutely. All clean energy. All of them.
We need absolutely everything.
Yes, we do.
The consequences.
As broad a portfolio as possible.
That's
Totally
why it's
agree.
so hard, but we need everything.
Yes, we do.
All right, there you go. Christiana Figueres, give this woman a round of applause, everybody.